Serious. What is the creepiest thing you've seen while hiking? Story 1. When I was younger and stupider, and going to college in the North Georgia mountains, my friend and I would go night hiking a lot in the trails near campus. I got pretty familiar with the area, and being out in the wilderness at night in general, which probably made me too confident. One night, the full moon was out, and the weather was perfect. So visibility was crazy good, everything was basically washed in dim blue light. I was slightly stoned and feeling adventurous, and I love doing fun stuff alone, so I decided to go enjoy a night hike by myself. I took a flashlight, but this was around 2002, so no cell phone. I chose a super easy trail that was mostly flat, maybe a mile loop, in a pretty secluded area, but not exactly a national park or anything, very rural area. I didn't even need my flashlight for most of it, I just hiked in the moonlight. It was actually a really cool and beautiful experience at first. At some point I started feeling uneasy. Maybe a millisecond later I heard a man's voice. It was coming from a good distance ahead of me, somewhere off in the woods, maybe from the right side of the trail. He was crying. I'm honestly an empathetic person, and 99.9% of the time I hear someone crying, I want to comfort and help them in some way. But this time I felt sick in my stomach, like a dry panic attack, if that makes sense. I remember coming very close to calling out to him because my brain was trying to tell me he might be hurt, which was the only reason I hesitated. But it was like my body shut my voice down before I could say anything, and I knew I had to stay very quiet. He was sobbing like he just found out a loved one had died, but also gibbering and almost babbling, like he was less than a person. There was a shrillness to it under his crying, like he was holding back a scream, but perpetually, on and on as if he'd been doing it all night. I remember it vividly, and my spine is tingling like crazy even as I write this. It's hard to explain, but I knew deep down he wasn't right in the head, and nothing good would happen if he realized I was listening. I went back the way I came. It was like I had tunnel hearing and the only sound in the world was crying. I was hyper aware of everything else around me, and beyond paranoid that I would snap a branch or snag my boot on something, I worried the man's crying would get louder if I wasn't paying razor-sharp attention, getting closer or turning into an outraged crazy person scream. Thankfully, it just faded the further I got from it, and I made it back to my car. Still, I was convinced some wild-eyed hermit was going to rush out of the forest and bite me to death. Right up to the second I locked my doors and got the hell out of there. I finally had the rest of my panic attack on the drive back. I managed to park back on campus, and I just sat in the car and collected myself. Adrenaline is freaking powerful. I've never felt a shred of guilt about leaving that guy crying out in the woods in the dark. I know I was slightly stoned, but slightly is the key word there. I'm convinced to this day I was in very real danger that night. Definitely not as insane as most of the stories in threads like this, but sometimes I get that same sick feeling deep down, whenever I wonder what might have happened if the moon had been less bright, or if I'd been more responsible, and I decided to use my flashlight even once. He'd have seen me for sure. Story 2. Not on a trail, but walking my dog late at night. It was about 1 a.m, my dog rang her bell and I begrudgingly got up to take her outside. When she wants to pee in the middle of the night, I don't take her very far, just in our side yard. I took a flashlight with me in case she decided to poo so I could pick it up. I'm standing there waiting for her to do her thing. She's doing the doggy walk in a circle thing. Then all of a sudden, the dog gets spooked and whips around. Out of the corner of my eye, I see this chick just standing there. I didn't see her walk up, I didn't hear her walk up. I just see her standing there super still. Based on her position, she'd have to have come from between my house and my neighbor's house. This is odd, because behind our houses back up to a green belt. It is probably 40 degrees outside and this lady, about 20, is in super short shorts and a t-shirt. I looked at her, told her she scared me, and she mumbled something like, "Nice night. What are you up to?" Standing there holding the leash with my dog, I said, "I'm walking my dog." Then she said, Cool. Do you know how to get into my house? I locked myself out," pointing to my neighbor's house. Now, I'm a good American, I know my neighbors, and this wasn't my neighbor, who's a single 30-year-old female. She hangs out with my wife, so I know her really well. So I asked her, "That house?" pointing directly at my neighbor's house. She nodded. I said, "You don't live there. I know who lives there." She just scoffed and wandered her way into my backyard. I followed her and said, "What the hell are you doing?" She then took off running and scaled my fence, which, item of note, fence. It is a see-through fence that goes up 3 feet with a cattle gate, and the top of the fence is stainless steel wire that runs horizontally. It is the type of thing that, if you weren't expecting it, you'd easily trip over it, as it is extremely hard to see and not very common. Anyway, she scales the fence and runs away into the greenbelt. I always have a pocket knife on me, and was fortunate enough to have my, unfortunately, useless dog, so I looked around my house, the neighbor's house for other people, shined my light in the greenbelt, and nothing. I have no idea how she wound up back there. What she was doing, what she intended to do, but she scared the ever-living crap out of me. Greenbelt is an unincorporated land or zone to never have anything built on it. i.e. backing up the edge of a forest, cliff, etc. In my case, it was a wooded area about a half-mile of nothing. Rattlesnakes, deer, mongooses, etc. live in that green belt. Common questions. Was she hot? In a different context, maybe. As a creeper chick leaping deer fences like Jason Bourne? No. Is my neighbor a lesbian looking for a strange? No, she isn't a lesbian. Was it a meth head? This is my best guess. It was late and she had the leaping abilities of a kangaroo. Story 3. Probably too late for this thread, but I love telling the story because it's just so bizarre, so here we go. When I was very little, like 5 or 6, my dad used to take me on all sorts of adventures through nature, especially when we owned a little cottage up in the Scottish Highlands. And my dad is sort of a combo Irish bloke, Yorkshire laddie type of fellow, and very spry, despite his being about 55 at the time. And on this particular occasion, had decided we were going to go hiking way up into the cliffs. I was quite happy with this development, as it meant a piggyback ride for at least 90% of the difficult bits. This was a proper trek. We wanted to get to one of the highest bluffs so we could have an amazing 360-degree view of the gorgeous meadows and some sparkling tea. But after we reached the top plains where it's all short, wind-whipped grass, and you can see for miles, he suddenly turned very still and very quiet. When you're small, your parents are God. So seeing your dad look frightened is scarier than anything your own mind can come up with. So I was pulling on his arm and going, What? What? My mom is epileptic and I saw her fits when I was a kid, so I thought it was happening to him too, or something similar. And I wouldn't know what to do because we're up on this huge cliff and no one is around. When just as fast as he started it, he snapped out of it. Fireman lifted me right up and just started striding away without a word. Over his shoulder, I could see a big pale yellow object stuck in the ground like an obelisk. I know now that it was a refrigerator. When I was older and asked my dad about it, he stiffened up and told me that when he was a boy in the 50s, he and his little friends had found an old-style fridge in the woods, and being little boys, they opened it. Well, of course, they had found a body, another child, who by whichever means had found themselves in the fridge and unable to get out. My dad has never mentioned a gender, which leads me to believe he either witnessed a very decomposed or skeletonized individual, but I can't ask him. Remember that episode of The Simpsons where they unlock Homer's PTSD, and it turns out he found a dead body when he was a teenager? My dad grew increasingly uncomfortable the first time we saw that episode, and excused himself to the kitchen before the ending. My dad has seen some gnarly stuff, but for whatever reason, he will not discuss anything further about this dead child in the fridge, only that it happened. So when he explained, I assumed it was the trauma and I said something like, "Oh, Dad, that's awful. So when you saw the fridge up there, it brought up the old memories?" And he honestly looked at me with his big blue eyes like I was an idiot. I'll never forget. "No, Amy," he said in a very low tone. "It was because it was the same fridge." I was a little girl, so there was no chance my dad was going to open the fridge while I was right there, and also possibly relive the experience of seeing what a mummified corpse inside a fridge looks like. No, I don't believe it was the same fridge. It literally would have had to traverse an ocean, but I believe my dad believes that it was. Most likely it was a very similar make or model and the sight of it just surprised him and sent him west. Someone pointed out it should have been reported just in case. I have absolutely no doubts that he did, but he's in his 70s now, so I don't intend on asking. I guess if you're ever up in the cliffs of the Isle of Skye, just keep your eyes peeled for a big beige fridge. Story 4. Not so much hiking as walking home after work one night a lot of years ago. I normally got off around 7 p.m. and my walks home were uneventful. However, this night, it covered a half shift for someone and worked until 11 p.m. There was a trail behind some train tracks I would take home to avoid walking beside traffic and whatnot. I came to realize that night those trails were a lot different at 11 p.m. than they were at 7 p.m. I happened across a guy who was laying by his bike moaning in pain. It didn't sound like real moaning, more like a kid's fake, "I have a tummy ache and can't go to school" moan. I also noticed his bike was standing up on its kickstand. It didn't make sense to me that he would set his bike up properly only to fall to the ground in pain. He saw me and called out to me for help, but I kept walking and turned to make my way back up toward the street. As I turn, I suddenly hear some shuffling around and the previously hurt gentleman yells at me, "I'm gonna kill you, freak!" He hops on his bike and starts rushing toward me. At this point, I'm most of the way up the incline going towards the railroad tracks that ran parallel to the street. I haul ass up there, and as I get over the tracks, my would-be assailant proceeds to hit the tracks with his front tire and flips over his handlebars, hitting the ground hard. He's now moaning in pain for real, and makes genuine calls for help. I use the payphone at the gas station to call the cops and explain what happened. They get there and the officer explains to me this guy's a village idiot who does this crap to rob people, and it's not the first time they had to pick his ass up after he biffed on a bike trying to rob someone. I told the officer he threatened to kill me and he laughed. The dude wasn't even armed, and apparently has had his ass kicked more times than he can count using that little line of his. Story 5. I was walking around my neighborhood once, alone, enjoying the night air and watching the stars. There was this little pond near my house, with a wooded area that had trees, a bench, and a rope swing that went out over the water. I sat down on the bench to look at the stars, and I heard some rustling off to my right, towards the trees. Bears were not uncommon where I'm from, so I took out my flashlight and shone it around over there. I didn't see anything. It freaked me out, so I kept my flashlight on and my senses aware. But I stayed on the bench to mull over my thoughts and watch the sky some more. I don't know why I did that, because that's typical horror movie crap. Anyway, a few minutes pass and I'm near nothing more, so I lean back into the bench and start to relax a bit. I'm staring up at the sky with my flashlight pointed downward, so as not to create any light pollution, when I noticed something in the tree in my peripheral vision. I couldn't tell what it was, but the branch was swaying slightly and the rustling noise was back too. I immediately sat up and stared at it, but hadn't shown my flashlight at it yet in case of pissing off some huge bird or something else. I don't think I've ever been that scared. I remember my heart was beating so fast and I could taste blood. I stared at it for what seemed like forever, and it slowly stopped moving, but the shape was still there. Bears do climb trees sometimes, so I was hesitant to run away in case that's what it was, so I just kept staring at it. After a while, I mustered up the little raisin-esque kahoonies to shine my goddamn light at the tree, and it was a man. A freaking man. In the tree. Crouched in the tree like some silent naked monkey. He had no expression on his face, but his eyes were open really, really wide. When my light landed on him, he started to move like he was going to come down, but I didn't stick around to see if he did. I jumped the bench and ran for the freaking hills. I ran to my house and around to the back door and locked myself in without looking back once. I went around and made sure every window and door was locked. I even checked the attic. I never go out alone anymore. Story 6. I went to this kind of outdoor education boarding school when I was 14 or 15 in the Victorian Alps in Australia. We hiked the mountains in that area almost every weekend, usually doing 2 to 3 night hikes, sometimes longer. We had heard from teachers and locals that there were hermits in the mountains who lived in shacks or drifted between the old cattlemen's huts. We just brushed them off as stupid stories that the teachers tell us to spook us. However, we did this one hike at the tail end of winter that kind of led me to believe there were actual hermits living in the mountains. Basically, we were doing this 4-day hike at the end of the winter, so it was super gloomy, foggy, and cold the whole hike. The Victorian Alps are famous for their cattlemen's huts, which are all over the high country. We would hike from hut to hut, but we rarely stayed in them because it was one of the school's rules. So we were hiking on the second day on this steep ridge and it was mega foggy and cold. You could see into the valley, only down the sloping edges of the ridge. When you're hiking long distances, you don't really talk the whole way, and since it was miserable, we just had our heads down walking straight. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a black dog about 50 meters down the side of the ridge. It was a dingo, because it was jet black and had a collar on. Looked kind of like a border collie. I had only just registered it as a dog in my mind when I swear I saw a man walking behind the dog. He looked homeless and was looking up at us. Bear in mind it was really foggy and this guy was darting in and out of trees. I turned around and told my mate I saw a dude and his dog on the trail below. He was still visible, so I pointed him out and my mate freaked a little too and told everyone else to look. At the moment of getting my group, 6 guys, to stop hiking and all looked, he was gone. Everyone other than myself and my mate who saw him shrugged it off as a day hiker and his dog. We joked it was a hermit but didn't speak about it much after. We arrived at our campsite, which was the Vallejo Gatner hut. We couldn't stay in the hut, so we set up camp on the flat ground around it. We set up, cooked dinner, and got ready to sleep. I didn't think much about the man and dog I saw earlier, but now it was getting dark, it kind of crept into my mind. There's this awesome toilet at this hut that overlooks the valley below. Honestly, an awesome crapper. It was almost dark and I needed stuff, so I headed to the loo. As I was sitting there and looking at the view, I was feeling a little creeped out. I don't know why. Now, one thing to note is that these huts are all covered in scribbles and people's names, little sayings, etc. Like literally every square inch is covered in something. So of course, you never really read anything on the walls if you stay at these huts like every weekend. Though as I reached for the toilet paper, these words literally jumped out at me. Run, 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 he's coming, run. I never wiped my ass faster. Combined with what I had seen earlier and my creepy feeling, I just bolted out of the bathroom into my tent. The guy I was tenting with actually was the one who had also seen the dude, so I told him what I saw in the bathroom. We both became pretty paranoid and just sort of laid there for hours not making a sound. Eventually, I went to sleep. Crap really gets weird when the next day we woke up to find huge portions of our food missing. We kept the food in the outside bit of our tents, in our hiking packs, and then inside zip bags. Half of my group's outside tent flies were undone with the packs open and food bags were strewn over the ground. We thought it was a wombat originally, but the bags were literally unzipped and our hiking packs had buckled to open them. My thinking was the dude I saw earlier was a hermit who followed us to our camp and stole our food at night. Honestly, creepiest moment I've ever experienced. Story 7. I had a group of friends who used to get together and play manhunt in a local park at night. Just a different way of saying a big game of hide-and-seek tag where 3 people start off it, and everyone else goes and hides in the park. As they find and tag people, they become it as well, until eventually there are only 1 to 3 people left, then we start again, and play into the early morning. Well, one night, I was in it with my friend and his younger brother. We were heading to the middle of the park to a hotspot for hiding places. There was a long stairwell that leads up to a huge hill to a pavilion and field. We were slowly walking down those stairs, maybe halfway down when we noticed 2 folks way below us. Thinking it was one of our friends, we yelled out, "Hey, who's that?" Instead of the normal reaction, which is to call out your name then sprint away trying to avoid getting tagged, a strange voice responds, "Who the hell are you?" We at first started sprinting down at them like we normally would, but then we realized they too were sprinting at us. We don't even hesitate, we turn around and sprint up the stairs as fast as we can. Adrenaline kicking in, hair sticking up on the back of my neck. We make it up to the top of the hill and pause. When I look back and they're right behind us, not more than 10 feet away, which is absurdly fast because of how much distance we had between us. We lose our minds and start sprinting as fast as possible to the park trail, which wraps around the entire park and leads to a road where one of our friends live that we used as a meetup spot between games. It's a 2-mile run back from where we are, so we book it, sprinting as if our lives depended on it, occasionally looking back and seeing the 2 people following behind. As we get nearer, our energy is spent, but we push on and make it to the street. Looking back and there's no sign of the 2 strangers. All of our group is back at the house, lounging on the driveway, having decided to prank us that night, and while we were off in the park searching for them, we shared our story with them and some laughed in disbelief. Others wanted to search in the park for those 2 randoms, but we never discovered who they were. All I know is that they were incredibly fast and shady as hell. Story 8. This wasn't on a hike, and this is pretty tame compared to some of these stories, but it's a bit similar. Back in our old place, one night my girlfriend and I were walking our dogs around the neighborhood. She's a lot smaller, so I was walking 2 of the dogs and she was walking 1, who was a former service dog. It was a really gentle dog, albeit a bit older. Other than snatching the ball away from the others during fetch, he'd never shown a bit of aggression. I walk a bit ahead of my girlfriend because of the 2 dogs pulling pretty hard on me, but not too far. Maybe 10 or 15 feet ahead, but around a corner. As I found out later, she'd slowed down, in part because she noticed someone nearby acting strangely, scoping out a house, I think. When he spotted her, he said hi and she responded in kind, asking how he was. Before he could answer, the dog she was walking started to growl and she apologized, commenting that he was a guard dog. The guy looked at her and said, "Well, he's doing a good job tonight." She was pretty spooked and hurried to catch up to me. We were more careful on nighttime walks from then on. Story 9. It wasn't what I saw. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, my dog got very agitated around a certain part of a trail and alternated between barking and snarling and hiding behind my legs. It creeped me out enough that we hurried out of there fast. Story 10. Not hiking so much as car camping, but we were way the hell out of there in the middle of nowhere on Bureau of Land Management land in Colorado. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road and didn't see another soul. You could see the headlights and hear cars from miles away from our campsite. It's not like somebody could have snuck up and noticed. We had 3 cars with us and 8 people. Just got done eating dinner and cleaned up. It was getting dark, so we went back to the cars real quick before hitting our tents for the night. Somebody had slashed the front tire on each of the 3 cars with what appeared to be a box cutter. Everyone thought it was a prank, but it became very apparent very quickly that it wasn't. All of us were beyond spooked, like panicking, scared to watch spooked. We all had spares, and one dude had a gun, so we threw on our donuts while that guy literally guarded us and got the hell out of there. Still have nightmares about it sometimes. Just knowing that there was some person probably watching us, maybe wanting to harm us, makes me feel physically ill to this day.